All right, guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, it's going to be a whole new type of video, a first video of its kind. And today I'm going to recap Shed Season 2025 and break down some of the data from it. This was a breakdown of things that I thought you guys might want to see, but if there's something that I left out or there's more information that you want to see for a future year, let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure to incorporate it if it's feasible. But I think that this breakdown is a good start for a video of this type. And at the end of this video, I will also give an update on the buck that I call Osiris. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, there was a dead shed antler buck that I found in February, and I immediately thought it was this buck I called Osiris. Fast forward to April, I was able to find his set and had the ability to go back and check to see if that shed antler buck was Osiris. So that's exactly what I did. I went and got the head. So you'll get an update on Osiris at the end of this video. I got to preface this video with a couple things. One is that I can only walk as far as the fence line allows me to where I have permission. Some of the data can be skewed. For example, if I find an antler 5 yards from a fence line, there's a good chance that the other side could be over the fence, and I am not able to obtain that data unless I have permission there. And then the last thing I should point out is in this video, I don't base any of my numbers on acres. There's too many variables with acres. Those are just three things I wanted to point out before we got this video started. So breaking it down right here off the bat, in 2025, there was 173 sheds that were found that I got to keep. So that's how many I'm gonna be basing my data on throughout this video. Those resulted from a number of miles walked. And for me personally, in 2025, I walked 379 miles. 28 of those miles were walked in Kansas. The rest was in Iowa. But when I include the miles that others walked who contributed to the 173 antler count, there was a total of 493 miles. The next thing I'm gonna break down is fresh versus old. So we had 173 antlers on this year. 121 of them were fresh and 52 of them were old. So roughly 70% were fresh, 30% were old. So the next part I'm gonna break down here is by state. 157 of them were found in Iowa, while the other 16 were found in Kansas. And then if I do a breakdown on miles per antler, 493 miles, divide that by 173, and that gets us at roughly 2.8 miles per antler. But then if I break it down by state here, in Iowa, we averaged 3.1 miles per antler versus Kansas, where I averaged 1.8 miles per antler. So something that's really interesting here to point out, when I went shed hunting in Kansas, it was in early February. It was like February 7th, 8th, and 9th, super early. And we were seeing a lot of bucks holding while we were there. And I still averaged that 1.8 miles per antler. My Iowa miles per antler in the first half of February, from January 31st to February 16th, for fresh antlers only, was 5.8 miles per antler. There was 58 miles walked in that time frame for only 10 fresh antlers, which is crazy compared to Kansas, where the average was 2.1 miles per antler for fresh antlers only, which speaks to how much better the success was in Kansas for the 3 days I was there. That's a breakdown by state. Now we'll look at right versus left. Out of the 173 antlers, 86 of them were right antlers, 87 of them were left antlers. That means half of the antlers were right, half of the antlers were left. That kind of shocked me. I didn't think it'd be exact, but it makes sense, right? How many match sets do we find this year? Huh? Cinder. Yeah, you're right. 35 match sets this year. 30 of those 35 match sets were fresh. 2 of those sets were old. And there was 3 antlers that I had found that were the match to an antler that I had found in a prior year. Next, we'll look at match sets distance. The average was 224 yards, with the smallest distance between antlers being 1 yard, and then the maximum 850 yards. For the fresh match sets, they averaged 200 yards apart, but for the old match sets, they averaged 434 yards apart. So another thing I broke down was the orientation, how each antler was laying when I found it. Out of the 173 antlers, 123 were tines up, so 71% of the antlers were tines up. 27 of the antlers tines down, so about 16%. 12 were kicked back. It was kicked back on like it's 2. It's about 7% of the total. And then 6 of the antlers were pedicle up, which would be like something like this, where you got one that's laid up like that. Then 2 were standing on their tines. Basically means that their tines had fell into the ground so they could stand straight up. 1 was not applicable because it was a spike. The spike, you can't really tell if it's tines up, tines down, it's just a little guy. And then 2 of them were hangers. So that's about 1% of the 173, which I thought was a interesting breakdown. The next thing I broke down was new spots walked. 91 of the antlers found this year were found on a new permission piece. 54 were fresh, 37 were old, which means about 60% were fresh, 40% were old. Looking at it from the contrary, places that I walked last year and then walked again this year, I found 82 antlers on those places this year. 67 of them were fresh, 15 were old, which means about 82% were fresh, 18% were old. Shows that walking a new permission piece has a better chance at finding an old one. So the next thing I'm gonna look at here is the conditions of when I found each antler. So on cloudy days this year, we walked 140 miles, found 60 antlers, which puts us at an average of 2.3 miles per antler. On rainy days this year, we walked 31 miles, found 18 antlers, which puts us at a 1.7 miles per antler. On snowy days this year, when there was about 1 to 3 inches of snow, I walked 18 miles, found 6 antlers. And then on sunny days this year, we walked 305 miles, found 89 antlers, which puts it at about a 3.4 miles per antler average, which speaks to how much the conditions can impact us finding sheds. All right, in this next category, I'm gonna catch a lot of flack for it. Just bear with me here. I took the liberty of estimating the age from each antler that I found. Some places I have a high level of confidence, and other places I only have permission to shed hunt, and so I don't have a lot of information on the deer other than that very shed I found. Things I looked at was like the total mass of the antler, like how much mass it had throughout its antler, not just at the base. I also looked at main beam length and then the mass at the pedicle. I've never personally seen a 2-year-old deer on trail camera with huge bases. Right here is a perfect example. Even if I didn't have history with this deer, I would immediately think 3.5-year-old deer. What makes me think it's not a super young deer is just the pure size of it, but then he doesn't have huge pedicles. And then like an antler like this, pure size of it, main beam length, I'm putting that one between 1.5 and 2.5. I'm sure I'm wrong on some of them, but I do think my breakdown is relatively close. I estimated that 100 of the 173 antlers that were found were off of a 1.5 to a 2.5-year-old deer. I estimated that 47 of the antlers were off 3.5 to a 4.5-year-old deer. And then I estimated about 26 of the antlers were on deer that were 5 or older. Next, I'm gonna take that estimated age and I'm gonna break it down even further. I'm gonna do a category here of match sets distance by age. I believe 18 of those sets were off of a deer that were 1.5 to 2.5 years old. The average distance between antlers on that age category was 217. For the sets off of deer that I believe were 3.5 to 4.5 years old, there was 11 sets and the average was 310. And then there was 6 sets that were off of deer that I believe were 5 or older, and they averaged at about 120 yards apart. I've always been under the suspicion that the antlers that are heavier and the older deer are gonna drop their antlers closer together than younger deer, because the younger deer are gonna have higher amounts of testosterone, so they're gonna be carrying it a lot longer. I have had a lot of 3.5, 2.5, 1.5-year-old deer on camera that will hold one side for multiple weeks, but it is rare that I've ever had like a 5-year-old deer, 6-year-old hold one antler for multiple weeks. It seems like the deer that are older drop their antlers in a much shorter time frame, which would correlate to them dropping their antlers closer together because there's less opportunity for them to travel a large distance. But we will explore that more throughout the years as we collect more data. But the next thing I want to touch on is deadheads. And when I say deadheads, I'm talking about does or bucks. So in total, deer that I found this year was 69, but I was only counting deadheads that were from deer that I believe died in either 2024 or 2025. I wasn't gonna count deer that I had known were from a prior year. I do think it's reasonable to say that at least 60 to 70% of the deer found this year were a result of EHD, and then the remaining had either been roadkill, wounded, you name it. But that's just based on information that I had at the time. A lot of assumptions are made there. So that was the breakdown of antlers and deadheads, and now we get to do one of the more fun parts, and that's looking at some of the biggest antlers that were found this year. So let's take a look here. Right here, biggest singles. That 3-point antler right there, which is missing another inch of its brow tine, measured 58 4/8, huge for a 3-point, and it weighs a lot. Like, that is a really, really heavy antler. Next was this awesome 4-point that I had found. It's beautiful antler, it was super fresh, full skin ring right there. And it was 66 on the dot. This one my dad found. He'd actually stepped on it on a new permission piece. This deer would have been a tank to see what he looked like the following year. That thing is 66 2/8. It's got a wicked inline point right there, triple brow tine. That was an awesome one. Here's the big 7, 68 7/8 right there, so just under 69 inches. This one looks like it would have been off a young stud on a new permission piece, 69 1/8. Doesn't have a huge pedicle right there, but it's got about everything else. That's definitely one you'd want to see next year. Beautiful color, 6-point, tall brow tine. Really good stuff right there. And then this one is the turkey spur from Kansas. That thing is wicked, and it measured 69 3/8, thick G3 right there, and it would have had a wicked inline point. The cool part about that was Hunter found this one the same day. Clearly tell that that's off that same deer. It would have had that inline point, and we had guessed that this would have been 2 years prior to the one I found. What about the match sets? What were the biggest match sets from this year? They were good. There were a lot of good ones from this year. So, One of the biggest match sets was the Pop Can 8-point. He actually scores as a 9 because he has that non-typical point. He was 63 and 3/8 on his right side, 63 and 2/8 on his left side. Super awesome mass right there. The 16-inch spread, that puts it right around 140. Coming in at third for match sets this year would have been off a Reaper. Left side, which was found first, scored 70 and 6/8. And then his right side scored 68 and 2/8. Those antlers were about 200 yards apart. Then the next set, which comes in at second this year, was Osiris. Super cool set right here. He has 8 scoreable points on his right side, 6 scoreable points on his left side. He himself has a turkey spur. And so his right side here scores 76 and 6/8, largely because he has 8 scoreable points here, these 2 wicked kickers off the base. And then his left side scored 65 and 2/8. That would put that buck just beneath 160 with a 16-inch spread. Now here's the crazy part, guys. I found that one earlier in the year, and you're gonna call me crazy. I personally think that this shed, this old shed, is off Osiris. The brow tine, the pedicle, and the main beam scream the same deer to me. This one was found within 200 yards of this one. Definitely interesting. And lastly is the biggest set from this year. It was off the Nighthawk. Biggest antler from this year is this 5-point, or well, I should say 6-point. Pretty crazy. The very first antler that we found this year was the biggest. His left side scored 78 and 1/8, and then his right side here scored 71 and 1/8. I think he has about a 15-inch spread. It's gonna put that deer right around 165, which would be the biggest set that we found this year. You have to watch the Shed Season video to understand why those were the first 2 antlers that were found. It would make a lot more sense. So that's the biggest sets from this year, but now you'll get to see what I thought were the coolest finds. Here's all the coolest antlers or most interesting antlers that I thought were from this year. And off the bat here, I'm going to detail this because I found this antler in February and I found this antler in March. Never thought that they were a set until I was going back through, looking at the singles, trying to identify any potential sets. Perfect example how much the shed tags can help, because I was able to identify that they were found on 2 farms that were close together. And when I finally mapped it out, they were 550 yards apart. But you can tell that they were found at different times. This one has a lot of its color still versus this one, because this one was out on a field edge in the sun. They were found 6 weeks apart. Can you believe that? 6 weeks apart. But they clearly are a set. Just look at their brow tines right here. Bam, bam. Main beam holds that same mass measurement throughout the entire way. So that was a really cool one. Another interesting one from this year was this guy. I mean, look at that. That's wicked how he grew off the head. I don't know if he damaged that when he was in the summer, but I really like that one. This one was also super interesting. Take a look at this guy and how his antler right there is hollow. Can you see that? I mean, that's unbelievable. You could pour some water in there. That's pretty gnarly. I love the small ones. That's another really cool find from this year. This was one of the top antlers I wanted to find this year, and I was super lucky to find it within like a week of him dropping. And that kicker is just gnarly. And here's the crazy part. I ended up finding this one later in the year, and I believe that this is off of that same deer. Call me crazy, but it's in the same area, same general vicinity. It would definitely make sense that this could be this deer. And this was him at 2, this was 1. So next on the list is this really big one. He has got a wicked 2 there on him, bladed. He's got split brow right there. It looks like he would have had an inline point. We'll never know because it's busted off. And whatever busted him off deserves an award, because that would be a tough antler to bust off. For it to be that discolored and all that under a cedar, it's gotta be super old. This one is an awesome one. We found this is off a buck I called Venom. I think he's 2 or 3. I ended up finding his other side when I was doing a controlled burn later this year. I know that he dropped this one early and carried this side for a while, and it ends up making sense because he broke off a lot here. That probably wasn't natural, and it lines up with the reason as to why I was seeing him carry this side so much longer. Another interesting find or cool find from this year was Maverick. I found his other side 2 years prior and found this side 850 yards from where I found his other side. And the crazy part was I had been putting out corn and this deer had been hitting the feeder, and I would have never thought he'd been that far apart, but he was. It just goes to show how much these deer are traveling that time of year, or some of these deer are traveling. I shouldn't say all. We're always learning. Another really interesting find from this year. 3 antlers off of the same buck in one weekend. This is off the buck I call Loppy. I filmed him on November 30th without this antler and was like, why did he drop his antler so early? I hope he's all right. Well, ended up finding out that he just broke a bunch off of his skull right there. I asked you guys on Instagram and Facebook if you think this deer will make it through. A lot of you responded with, yes, this deer should make it through. So that has me very optimistic we'll see him. And we also found his other side right here. And that's why we call him Loppy, because he's so lopsided. This side scored 64 and 3/8, but this guy had scored 59 and 4/8. He dropped this one in February and he dropped this one in November. And you wanna know how far apart they were? 50 to 100 yards apart. So even though they were 3 months apart, they dropped coincidentally in the same area. Whether this one was naturally shed or from a fight, I'll never know. And here's an interesting thing that I found on some of the deadheads that I found this year. Take a look at this. Here's like 2 deadheads I found this year. I just noticed this. Look at this one. Look at how much bone he has between the base of his antler and between the top of his skull. Now compared to this one, look at that. It's like really tight. And then what's interesting here is he's got a seam right here, right there, and right there. I wonder if this deer would have shed right there and he'd have had a big chunk out of his skull and we'd have found it and been like, whoa, that deer lost a lot of its skull. That might explain why, like we saw Loppy had one side that was so thick and deep off of his antler. The thing that's interesting about it is he's only on one side. So why he didn't do it on the other side? I don't know. You want to make sure to follow on social media because I will make sure to give you an update on that deer as the season progresses. And that is some of the coolest finds. Now, what are some of the achievements from this year? Well, I don't have all the deadheads with me here yet because I haven't gone out and collected all of them yet. But one of the achievements from this year, as far as the deadheads go, is I found that awesome deadhead that has the 10-inch drop tine. The biggest drop tine I had found up prior to that is like 4 or 5 inches. So that was a really cool find. Another thing is that this first year that I found 3 sets off of the same deer. This is off the buck that we call Tootsie Roll. We found his set this year, which makes it the 3rd year in a row that we had found his set. So that's some of the achievements for this year. But there's one more thing I gotta show you guys. And that's the update on the buck I call Osiris. I found a dead shed antler buck back in February. I thought it was Osiris. And then after finding his antlers, I'm like, well, now I can see if the shoe fits. So I went back, got the head, and you can tell for how cleaned up it is is Osiris. And it fits up pretty perfectly. The right side's not as telltale other than the shape of the pedicle. It's like a backwards D. And then you look at the pedicle here, it's a backwards D. If that didn't sell it enough, this is where I really can tell it's him, is how there's some cutouts there around the edge of the pedicle where it would have broke off. Those edges line up perfectly on the pedicle. When I come down and sit this on here, right here, you should see exactly how that fits up right there. So unfortunately, that is Osiris. When I found him and how his antlers were just freshly scabbed over, would have been about a week after I believe he dropped his antlers. The only thing I can really suspect is maybe he got hit by a car. There was a road about 200 yards away, so maybe he got hit and he made his way over. Maybe it was natural cause. We won't really ever know. I don't want to say it, but that's one that I think had a reasonable chance at breaking that 180 mark. We'll never know though, and that's just part of it. So that's the update on Osiris. Some interesting notes here. Out of those 35 match sets, 30 of them were fresh, which means that 50% of the fresh antlers that were found this year were part of a set, which is really cool. I also thought it was super interesting that the right-left distribution was like 50-50 exact. And then one of the other things I thought was really interesting is the miles per antler for Kansas versus Iowa, especially when you consider that Kansas was in the early part of February. I think the big thing there was the deer numbers seemed to be way higher and the deer seemed to be more dispersed. And then another thing to point out about Kansas is that the farms weren't as broken up as they are in Iowa. Iowa is very broken up. There's a lot of 40-acre tracts, 80-acre tracts. There, it seemed like everything was bigger tracts. People would be like, dude, no, you have no idea. I'm sure that there's parts of Kansas that are just as broken up as they are in Iowa. But that's what I noticed about Kansas. 3-day trip, take it with a grain of salt. And I went out with some great guys, put me on some great ground. So it is not to say that where I went in Kansas represents the entire state. For where we did go, and if I put it up the best places I can shed hunt here in Iowa, Iowa didn't hold a match to what I saw in Kansas. At the end of the day, we had a great shed season. It was really fun to experience 2 different states this year. A lot of things to be optimistic about. Yeah, it sucks Osiris died, but we didn't find that many dead deer from EHD, or at least what I thought we were going to compared to last year. I think EHD was really bad this year. It's just on the farms that I could walk, it wasn't as high on average compared to last year. I would like to do this every year so we can continue to compile some data as we move through the years of shed hunting. If there is anything that you want me to include for future years going forward, comment them below to let me know. But we got plenty of other videos coming out. Until next time, I'm signing out.